Hi all, it's Emily Wren. I'm back with another edition of LPL Corner. I'm solo today, so I'm just going to be kind of talking about LPL MVPs, which started a lot of discussion on social media, and then our first round of playoffs, because playoffs are already underway in LPL. As they are in LCS currently. So if you are joining us live, thank you so much. Because we know that LCS is on and you could easily be watching FlyQuest versus EG. So the first thing I do want to kick off with is a look at the LPL MVPs that were announced. So we have the all-pro teams and the MVP and rookie of the split and that kind of thing. The first team is the Shy top, Kanavi jungle, midnight, bot Jackie Love, a support Lumao. Second team is Zoom top, Ning jungle, rookie mid, Loken bot, Paolan support, and third team is 369 top, Weiwei jungle, Mole mid, Chomeng bot, and PP God support. Now I think, and then we have Knight winning MVP, which I think I don't think anyone can argue. Like maybe their person didn't win, but like I really think Knight deserves it. And I'm not gonna go through and like handpick and be like, I would have put this person here, blah blah blah. With one exception. I think if you've been watching the LPL this split, not to take away anything from Kanavi or Ning, my actual all team jungler first team would have come down to Weiwei, who's on Victory 5, who was the selected third team jungler, and WE Beishang, which once again, I have a habit of talking up players that have just come off of like a really unlucky performance or like a really big defeat, because obviously he just played against LGD last night and WE lost. There were multiple games where Peanut and Xie definitely got the upper hand of him and Teacher Ma. But I did want to look at Beishang for a little bit, because I think he's done so much for WE, and I really think he deserves a shout out. And a lot of the times, like, again, I'm not here to like yell and be like, Beishang was robbed, I'm so angry. Because a lot of times what happens, especially in I've noticed in LPL and LCK, it also happens in LEC and LCS as well, but to a lesser extent. I feel like sometimes for whatever reason, I see Western voters are more willing to give teams that are like fourth place and below, if there's a player who's been like an insane standout, they're more willing to give those players a chance sometimes in all pro team voting than LPL or LCK voters. So I think part of it, if you're like really mad about MVPs, part of it is obviously that these are the top teams, right? Like JDG, TES, and IG, like all had really, really strong regular season splits. It makes sense that they're going to get more of the nod, even though like I know people are kind of side-eyeing the Paolan second team pick because he didn't play as many, like, not that he hasn't been playing really well. I actually think he's had like a career split, to be honest, but he hasn't played the entire split. So, you know, I think there's a reason why we're seeing the results here, but I do want to give Beishang a nod because I feel like he has been such an incredible jungler all split, actually. He is really smart. Like I actually think his early pathing and attention to the game is just really, really smart. I think he does so much for WE that is like really intangible unless you kind of study his pathing over and over and over again. And I also think one of the minute things that I've brought up before, and I know Lyric, Jordan Corby has brought up several times on broadcast, is that Beishang is so good at switching his teamfight positioning based on what kind of champion he's playing, right? So if he's playing something like the Graves, he has like 80 carry level positioning sometimes. It's incredibly impressive. And then he can swap it up if he's playing something like a Lee Sin that's more of like a facilitator, or in some of these like global pick-oriented comps that WE typically likes to run, or did like to run throughout the regular season. He plays a huge part in his positioning and his flanking and setting up those skirmishes. And sometimes dividing whole team fights to break it down into smaller skirmishes so Team WE can come out ahead. Some of his statistics, like third overall KDA at 5.2 of all LPL junglers. He had the fourth highest kill participation at 74.3%. They gave him actually a lot of resources, and I think one of the more impressive statistics about him is actually, I mean, he had the second highest amount of kills and the second highest amount of assists, which I know they mentioned on broadcast, but he actually had the lowest death rate of any starting jungler in LPL, which was 15.3%, and I thought that was also a really impressive statistic to bring up for Peishong. Again, I'm not trying to take away any other jungler who was selected on these teams. I just want to put out a pick that I would have picked if I was a voter. It would have, like I said, it would have come down between him and actually V5 Weiwei for first team all-pro jungler. So obviously I'm not in accordance with the LPL voters, but I do understand why the votes ended up this way. I also think that Knight he's just an absolutely insane player. And a lot of the things I said about Rookie mid-split, which it's, again, like people were saying, it's kind of insane to see Rookie on a second team, right? And that's a nod to just how good Knight has been. A lot of the things I said about Rookie very early on in the split, where I was like, the rest of his team is really struggling and he has been the bright spot. I think sometimes when we saw TES struggle a bit more towards the end of the season, Knight was just such a huge difference maker for this team. So he provides not only just an insane amount of stability in the center of the map, which we talk about mid and we talk about mid jungle all the time, and just having control of that mid lane is so important. But then also he can just completely beast a team fight. Like he can step up and have these insane individual carry moments in addition to doing everything for his team early. So I feel like he definitely deserves that MVP award. That's actually all I'm going to say about MVPs, because like I said, I don't want to get super nitpicky into like, I hate this, etc. I actually don't strongly feel any one way or the other about some of these MVPs outside of the absence of Peishong. So I just did want to bring him up because I know WE has not been a super impressive team this year. But they were a pretty consistent team in terms of, play style and identity. And I think Peishong has a lot of times made them look like a lot stronger team than they might have been. And with that, I'll transition into last night's match first, actually, which was WE versus LGD. So again, this is kind of an odd time to be talking about how good Peishong is, because last night he was really, really pressured out by both Peanut and Xie. And for me, this is a lot more about the Xie Teacher Ma matchup than it is about the Peishong versus Peanut matchup. Peanut and Xie were such a stronger 2v2 last night than Teacher Ma and Peishong. And I know there are a lot of very strong opinions, one way or the other, on Teacher Ma and whether he is, so bad for the team that they should be starting Shanks. That was kind of a running narrative throughout the year. There was also the running narrative that he's kind of the poor man's Doinby, even though I think he plays a lot differently than Doinby does. Like Doinby, you kind of, we'll talk about him later, but like you kind of think of him as a secondary jungler almost, right? With how much he roams and how much map control he has, and his understanding of the map is, in my opinion, a lot more impressive than Teacher Ma's, and his champion pool is significantly larger, where I think Teacher Ma, I've joked around that every champion he plays is like some version of Aurelion Sol, or he plays every champion like some version of Aurelion Sol. Aurelion Sol is kind of like his go-to pick. And then it was the Galio and the TF, and WE really liked to run a lot of these global compositions to make up for his lack of laning prowess. And last night that was completely torn apart by LGD. And Xie just, him and Peanut have been huge standouts for this team all split when they've been winning. I actually picked WE, which looks really dumb now, but going into this series, neither team looked super impressive in their final week. And I understood that LGD had, I was expecting it to be a 3-2, first of all. I was expecting it to be really messy. I gave WE the nod because they've been more consistent in their play style all year. But I think LGD really tore that apart, where they, obviously they banned out the Galio. WE ended up banning out the TF themselves most of the time. And then that really left like she had just absolutely destroyed mid lane with Zoe in game one. Part of that was because, and another thing I do want to touch upon with WE is we talked a lot about Morgan because he was such a highly rated player going into this year, coming out from having played under Zoom. We were thinking that he was going to really come onto this W team and do super well, and his understanding of flanking and TPs. And sometimes you did see flashes of that, but other times you saw him really not coordinate well with his team. And I think game one specifically, there's a dragon fight where he just absolutely goes in, and it's like actually a really good engage, but the rest of the team isn't there and they can't back him up. It's really unfortunate, but it also was kind of a microcosm for not only were Xie and Peanut just, again, absolutely destroying the 2v2 against Beishang and Teacherma, but when it came down to these team fights that WE is kind of known for, like a team like WE who is playing the style they are because they're trying to cover up some of their individual player weaknesses in either laning or champion pool, you have to all be on the same page and you have to be executing at a really strong level. And when something like that happens, when, you know, your top laner is going in and the rest of the team doesn't follow up, I mean, your entire game plan really falls apart if you're not on the same page. And I do think that we saw that from WE as well last night, where LGD were just so much stronger in the jungle mid 2v2 and also just so much more coordinated when it came down to some of these team fights. I'm still not sure how I feel about Morgan going forward. I do think he had like an uncharacteristically like really off performance last night, but here are some like legitimate concerns that I see with him. Some games, his coordination and his like teleport timing and flanks are just like so good. And other games they're not. So he just has to be a lot more consistent about that. But then there's an emerging kind of issue with his champion pool. And I don't want to contribute to the Renekton discourse because it is already kind of exhausted me. But I do think his over-reliance on certain picks, including the Renekton, does speak to the fact that they either really, really want to focus on getting him on these picks because, again, it was always part of WE's strategy just to kind of get every single person on their team on these comfort picks so then they could coordinate well together and typically use these global comps around TF, around Galio, and Teacher Ma leaving lane, or Morgan TPing down bot for specific fights. And if Morgan's timing is not down on that, and if he isn't getting his own advantages in top, that's also an issue. So going forward, kind of post-mortem for WE is that I do think Jomung improved a lot. I think that they do need to figure out their mid lane situation, whether that means like we're going to see Shanks and Demacia Cup. We will see. I already gave my thoughts on Beishang. I think he's actually insanely talented, regardless of what people think after last night and Peanut and Xie's performance. LGD moving forward, the reason why I found it hard to believe in LGD wasn't because I don't know they have the talent on this team. It was actually because they've been so wildly inconsistent throughout the split that it was really difficult to bet on them in playoffs. If this team like has any sort of forward momentum to go through playoffs, they actually have the talent to make kind of a mess of the bracket, so to speak. Another interesting thing about LGD that we saw last night was the return of Kahlua, who I've always talked about as like the Tom Kench master, because I believe it was in 2018 where he like tried out so many runes and builds on Tom Kench specifically. And even in this series, you saw him a lot more comfortable on the Tom Kench than the Lulu. And then Mark came in for game 4, who's been starting for most of the team. So I'll also be curious going forward from LGD to see how what they're going to do with their bot lane situation and who they're going to start at support. Moving on to FPX V5. For those of you who haven't been paying attention to LPL and may not have caught up on what has been going on with Fun Plus Phoenix, they have actually looked really shaky this split for a lot of reasons. Most people will target the switching between Gimgoon and Khan as like destabilizing a team that was really finely balanced. I think that's part of it. I also think that the mid-jungle synergy, and again, I know I'm talking about mid-jungle a lot, but it's just really, really important, especially when you have so many of these LPL teams that really, really want to fight and skirmish early, right? Like that's what the LPL is known for. We see it all the time, and your mid-jungle 2v2 coordination and map control is like huge. I think Tian and Doinby have had a lot less synergy this year, and Tian has actually looked a lot less impressive than he has last year. Last year, I thought he was one of the best junglers in LPL, and certainly one of the best junglers at Worlds. Someone asked me on Twitter about their over-reliance on Lilia in the first 2 games. So I'm going to talk about that a bit because I think it ties into some of the issues that Tian has been having all split. And it's that they've had, like, when you think about like classic FPX, you think of Doinby as almost like a second jungler and Tian kind of like roaming around, starting these early skirmishes, grouping up with Crisp sometimes if he's detached from the bot lane, and just killing people early and taking over the map, right? And that is typically how FPX would use the fact that Doinby would leave lane so much. And a lot of the time, that was also reliant on Tian coming and resetting Doinby's wave so that they didn't lose as much experience or CS, or that they were still punishing whoever their opponent was in mid lane and forcing them to reset the wave on their own or lose CS or experience. I think the reliance on Lilia. So what Lilia does is she has just an insane early clear. She's really strong early. She also, like, if you manage to hit all her abilities, and like her kit is such that if you stack everything together, you can CC someone for a really long time who do a lot of damage. We saw it happen once, I believe, in one of Tian's team fights. Both of these were losses in their playoff match against Victory 5. What he did win with it once in the regular season, and this was definitely one of their focus picks. They picked it first rotation in both games 1 and game 2, and I think this was kind of a shot in the dark that I'm assuming they tried it in scrims, and trying to find something that Tian is comfortable on that will give him that same early game prowess that so characterized his playstyle and FPX's playstyle last year. So if you have Doinby on something like Karma, like people are like, well, you know, Karma's kind of boring, but she has poke, she shoves the wave. Doinby uses her really, really well. Like he knows how to play Karma really, really well, and use her like actual pretty significant amount of damage later on to both protect his teammates, but also just, you know, constantly heal in team fights and skirmishes and do live early poke damage. And Tian, I think, did have like some pretty strong like early game moments. But the problem with Lilia, and this isn't just a Tian thing, but we've seen it several times in LPL outside of like a few games that actually Vici Gaming, who didn't make it in the playoffs, but Loyan, if you remember him from IG last year, he's actually been the most successful jungler with Lilia. And we're finding that teams in LPL, despite the early advantages that she gives you, are not able to translate that into actual wins. And that is what happened with FPX in these games. If I'm looking at FPX's draft, it really seems like they looked at Victory 5 and they were like, we know Victory 5 want to fight early. We know they want to fight around bot lane pressure. Let's focus on trying to get early bot lane pressure and early pressure in general, and try to kind of like keep their bot lane down. Where I think my argument here, which was actually proven false, so I'll talk a little bit about how V5 won as well. But my argument going into this was that if FPX played Khan, despite the fact that the team has looked less coordinated with Khan in the top lane earlier this split, Khan is a stronger laner that you're going to put on carries. And when teams have beaten Victory 5, some of it has been taking advantage of BBU in the top lane, despite the fact that he is, I mean, I know they've said this on LPL broadcast several times. It cannot be reiterated enough how much better he looks on Victory 5 than Suning. Like it's actually insane the amount of improvement that he has had. He used to be one of, like, I know Lyric says that he was the worst top laner previously. Definitely one of, if you're like ranking top laners. And I wasn't sure about him going into playoffs. He was the one part of Victory 5 where I was like, okay, maybe FPX decide we're going to attack topside. We're going to spread Doinby's influence top. We're going to roam top. We're going to attack them. And that's how, like, we're going to beat Victory 5. And we're not going to try to kind of match the bot lane pressure that they like to get. And additionally, Mole he's different than Doinby, but he is also another mid laner who works really, really well with his jungler to support his jungler. And I think that BBU really stepped up in this series, to be honest. And I had already thought that he was like majorly improved, but one of the main differences in this series for me was BBU, because after FPX did decide to attack topside with Jax and Tian on Trundle, that was the game that FPX won. And I was like, okay, they figured it out. They're going to attack BBU top. This is how they're going to kind of bring it back and, overcome this game and go and take on Suning in the next round. And what Victory 5 did is when they locked in Lucian into the GP matchup, which, again, regardless of what you think about Gimgoon's laning, GP is one of his like signature champions with FPX. And, BBU really stepped up. Like, Lucian is obviously a counter pick, but it's also very risky, right? You're basically putting the carry prowess into his hands and saying, we don't typically focus topside, despite the fact that we do put you on stuff like Renekton that gives you strong laning matchups. But this is all you are going to have to kind of destroy Gimgoon, and this is part of our strategy. And he really stepped up and looked great in this game 4. So that's another thing to watch out when they take on Suning tonight, because I also think that I haven't been very kind to Suning. I think they've won a lot of games based on capitalizing on their opponent's mistakes rather than coordinating really well as a unit. But I think that Bin has been playing really well. I think that Angel has been playing really well. And also, if there's like kind of one player that you might want to keep your eye on, it's Huanfeng in the bot lane, who's paired up with Sword Art. You guys might know him from Flash Wolves. So yeah, that is the Victory 5 Suning matchup tonight is going to be really, really interesting. I still want to give Victory 5 the edge here. So I'm thinking like a 3-1 or 3-2 Victory 5. Unless Suning can show some sort of like ungodly level of coordination that they haven't had this split. Because with Suning, for me, it's not that they don't have the individual talent. Like I said, Angel's been playing really well. Bin has been playing really well. people know Sophom and like his play style. This is a pretty good jungle meta for him. Their bot lane's been performing well. So it's not about the individual pieces for me for Suning. It's about the fact that they sometimes hesitate a lot and wait for their opponents to make mistakes. So that's not going to necessarily work against Victory 5, especially the Victory 5 that we saw in this FPX series that were really willing to, again, like rely on BuBu, who hasn't even been, a major like super carry top for them in the same way that like playing Lucian top into a GP is. So I'm really excited for this matchup. I am giving Victory 5 the edge. I think it's going to be pretty close. It'd also be cool to see Suning win because I think Huanfeng, again, is one of the better AD carries in the league and just someone that people should be paying attention to. And yeah, that is it for this week's LPL Corner. I'm sorry that it was a half hour of talking to you guys, and I'll hopefully fix my computer next time so I can actually read Twitch chat, because unfortunately it makes my computer lag so much that I am unable to read it. If you have any questions for me, definitely like tag me on Twitter if you want to yell at me for saying that I would put Beishang possibly first all-pro team. You can yell at me on Twitter for that at League of Emily. We'll also might be talking a little bit more about the LPL since we are in LPL playoffs on our regular League of Legends show, The Rift Rewind. That's every Tuesday night. And so thank you so much for joining me, even though LCS playoffs are going on, to chat about LPL. Hopefully I'll be getting some guests down the line so that it won't just be me talking at you guys, especially for playoffs, because there's a lot to talk about. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me, and I will be back next week to talk more LPL playoffs, and hopefully some of our teams will have qualified for Worlds already by then too, because it's looking like if Top Esports or JDG end up making it past semifinals, they either qualify for winning the final or on championship points. So they're both in a really good position to be the LPL's second or first seed. Thank you for joining me this afternoon, and I will catch you guys later. Bye.